We are kicking off this new series today, and I think there's a question, at least that I've been asking myself, I'm sure you have been asking yourself, at least I've heard multiple people ask this before, and it's just simply this. Does it feel like, as a society, or maybe even personally, that we are angrier than we used to be? That there are things that we are just madder about than we ever used to be, just in general. Again, maybe you're like me, it's like because you got kids and it's a lot of work, right? Or maybe it's something bigger and deeper than that. Well, I was trying to do some research this week to feel like, is this just my weird kind of anecdotal thing, or is this a real thing? And they've been doing some research. There's this group, the Gallup group. They've done all kinds of polls, all kinds of things like that. And what they did is they found out and researched that we actually were kind of growing in anger, and then 2020 hit, and then we just leveled out, and everything was happy, and no, that's not how it worked. We actually gone up, as you can see, for the last 10 years, the last decade. And part of this is also including like anxiety and stress, but anger and being mad is 100% included in this. And as you can see, it's just up and to the right, and the things that we don't want to be up and to the right about, right? And I think there are all kinds of reasons for this. I think probably the easiest one to pick on is social media, right? Because like there is something about social media, like whenever I make the mistake of getting on social media first thing in the morning, it's like I'm saying like, good morning, what are we mad about today, right? Like I just instantly kind of have to take that in, and like based on like the feed that I have, like I find out that we're mad about politics, my neighbors, the final episode of TV shows, weather, sports, the price of eggs, whatever it is, right? There's just so many different things that everyone seems to be angry about. And even if there's like a video that like I'm watching, I'm like, this is the most wholesome, happy, this just makes you feel good kind of video. If I make the mistake, don't ever go to the comment section. If I make the mistake of going to the comment section, it is always the most divisive, toxic thing I've ever seen in my life, right? There are some people saying, this is so beautiful, and other people saying, you're an idiot for thinking that's beautiful. I can't believe you. And it's just people fighting about like a picture of like a dog and a duck having a best friendship, and it's just amazing, right? But I think also if you're here and you're like, well, I'm not on social media, I don't think it's just social media. Because one phrase that I feel like I have heard, I know I have said multiple times, and I've heard other people say over and over, is like, can you believe what these people are mad about? Or have you heard about the newest thing that people are mad about? And then you start to get mad about what other people are mad about, right? And sometimes it's even just like a small minority of people are really mad about this, and now it's just making us mad. So we get mad at what other people are getting mad about. Or sometimes I feel some guilt and some shame about, because like sometimes I feel like the things that I can easily get so mad about are so small compared to like some of the bigger world issues that we have. Like maybe like Russia invading Ukraine, the conflict in the Sudan right now, human trafficking. There are so many other issues in the world that it feels like I should be getting more mad about this, but instead I'm mad about the Starbucks line just being a little bit too long. And I think I'm probably not the only one that feels that way. And so that's why we're doing this series, The World's Gone Mad. And in this series, we are hoping that through kind of just despite what maybe culture is trying to feed us about being mad and being outraged about things, that we can find peace that only comes from God through all these different avenues that we're going to be talking about. Specifically through the series, we're going to be talking about getting mad at us, talking about like Jesus followers. We're going to be talking about getting mad at them, people who maybe wouldn't claim Jesus as like their Lord and Savior. And then we're also going to be talking about getting mad at me, because I know I've heard a lot of you, and that's been a big issue. No, I'm joking. It's 100% like ourselves, right? Like it is me, but you, when I say me, I'm talking about you. Fair? All right. So yeah, us getting mad, because if we're honest, I think sometimes the thing and the person that we get maddest about is just us, right? Sometimes it's things that we did. Sometimes it's maybe we said something hurtful. Sometimes it's maybe a relationship that didn't work out, and part of it was because of something that you did. Maybe it's like that money that you spent and you instantly like, man, I cannot believe I did that. Maybe it's that addiction that you have fed. Maybe it's that lie you have told. Maybe it's something else that you've been holding on to, and you're like, I cannot believe I did that. And you've been holding it over yourself for so long. And sometimes it's the things we didn't do, right? Maybe not achieving what you thought you would at this point in your life. Maybe it's the time that you wasted. Maybe it's an opportunity that you missed, that you can't believe you did, or a risk you didn't take. Or maybe that's that love that you didn't express to somebody and now you feel like it's been too late, or forgiveness that you withheld, right? There are so many different things that we can kind of hold on to and get angry with ourselves. But the story I want to look at today, I think, kind of shows us that we don't have to be stuck in those things, and there is freedom in continuing to move past those things and the ways that we failed and the ways that we've messed up. And so we're going to be looking at the book of John for quite a bit of the message today. And it's basically this is like a book that one of Jesus' followers, they wrote down kind of like an account of Jesus' life, trying to write down all the things that was going on during his time here on earth. And so just to kind of set up this passage we're about to read, it's part of it is like this is the night that Jesus is going to die, and Jesus knows that. His disciples are kind of not really understanding that yet. They're having this final meal together, and so like you can imagine just kind of the awkwardness of this meal, right? Because Jesus knows this is his last meal with them. They don't really understand that or know that yet. And so like if you and I, if we had a last meal with somebody that we really cared about and you got to have that opportunity, you're not going to talk about like the finale of Love is Blind, right? Like you are going to talk about only the things that matter most, right? You want to leave them with the most important things. And that's what Jesus is doing. He has like this big impassioned speech that he gives them, kind of reiterating some of the things he's taught and kind of really hitting the most important things. And then we're going to see their response to it, but let's check out what Jesus is saying real quick. He says this: I give you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. So you also must love each other. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other. Like this is like Jesus' greatest hits teaching, right? And then this next moment, because I just got to make sure we're all on the same page and feeling this, is like, if you're a parent, you have absolutely had this feeling before, where sometimes, like earlier in the day, I will talk to my kids and say like, hey, today we're doing this, we're going to the park, whatever. And then later on, like they get in trouble for something, right? Or like they make a mistake and I'm like trying to correct them, trying to help them understand something. Or maybe they're not even in trouble, I'm just trying to help teach them something. And then in the middle of me teaching and saying like, feeling like they're connecting, they got this. And then my son will just go, but are we still going to the park today? And I'm like, what are you talking about? We are not talking about that right now, right? That's exactly what's about to happen. Jesus is talking about love. He's not talking about going anywhere, right? And then this is what Peter says next. Go ahead, throw that up. Simon Peter said to Jesus, Lord, where are you going? Can you just imagine Jesus in this moment? Like, that is not what we're talking about. But he gets down to Peter's level, and Jesus answered, where I am going, you can't follow me now, but you will follow later. And Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I'll give up my life for you. He says, Jesus, I don't know what's about to happen. Guess what? I'm ride or die. Let's go. I'm one of your day ones. I'm going to stick with you through everything, man. No matter what happens, even if we die together, we going to die together. It's going to be an epic story, right? Like he is like, I am with you, Jesus. And then Jesus replied, will you give your life up for me? I assure you that you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. He basically just says, no, like you say you're going to die for me, that's not really going to happen. Have you ever had somebody you say something and they're like, no, that's not true, and then you try really hard to prove them wrong? Like I remember if you would have asked me in middle school or even most of high school what I was going to do for the rest of my life, it was for sure I was going to be an NBA star. I never even started for varsity, never ever started on any of my teams, but I was for sure that's what I was going to do. And most of the time when people say that, I remember people just like, yeah, man, go for your dreams. And I remember there was this one kid my freshman year that said, you can't be in the NBA. You're not that good. And I said, yes, I can. And so for the rest of that week, I practiced really, really hard every single day at the end of after practice, doing all the things. And then I didn't get any better, and I gave up because I was so frustrated, right? But I tried really, really hard to prove that kid wrong, and of course he became right because I never made it to the NBA. Didn't even play in college. Wouldn't have been good. But like in that moment, like you can almost feel like Peter, like we've been there before, right? Like he's like, no, I'm about to prove you wrong, Jesus. Like you've been right about all these things, Jesus, but I'm about to prove you wrong right here because I'm going to show you that I am ride or die with you. So Jesus says this to Peter, and then there's this big event that happens where they're arresting him. They're taking Jesus to trial. All of the disciples are out of there, right? They're like, this ain't looking good right now for Jesus, and if they know we're connected, we all gonna hide. So everyone's hiding, and they're putting Jesus on this big mock trial that's like obviously kind of already slanted to try to make sure he lost in this. But Peter still wants to see what's going on. So he kind of goes near where they're having this big court trial and is like kind of creeping from the side, just trying to see what's going on with Jesus. And then this happens. Check it out in John 18. A servant woman stationed at the gate asked Peter, "Aren't you one of this man's disciples?" "I'm not," he replied. The servants and the guards had made a fire because it was cold. They were standing around it, warming themselves. And Peter joined them there, standing by the fire and warming himself. So he's watching Jesus, probably in the worst night of Jesus' life. Not probably, for sure the worst night of Jesus' life. And Peter is watching him. And someone literally, just hours before he said, "Hey, I'm going to ride or die with you, Jesus." And someone says, "Hey, do you know this guy?" And he goes, "No." And then he does that thing. I know we've all done this before. You might not want to admit it because it's church. But we're like, when you kind of tell a white lie and you don't want to get caught on it, so you act like you have to go do something else so you don't have to stand with that person anymore. That's 100% what Peter is doing right here, right? Like, he just said, "No, I don't know that guy. Oh, man, my hands are cold. I got to go over here and warm my hands up by the fire," right? Like, instantly kind of goes off to try to get away from this situation. And then Jesus' trial continues, and they come back to Peter, and this is the next part. It says, "Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing with the guards, warming himself, and they asked, 'Aren't you one of his disciples?' And Peter denied it, saying, 'I'm not.' And a servant of the high priest, a relative of the one whose ear Peter had cut off," because earlier in the night when they tried to arrest Jesus, Peter was the crazy friend who came out with a sword and said, "You ain't taking my friend," and chopped a dude's ear off. Let me just say, if I am there witnessing you chop off one of my family members' ears, I'm probably going to remember your face. Like, I just don't think that's a face you forget, right? And so this guy is like, no. Weren't you the one that just cut off that ear, right? And he said to him, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" And Peter denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Can you imagine, like, in that moment, how much shame and embarrassment that Peter felt? Literally just hours before, he's looking Jesus in the eye saying, "I'm riding with you, ride or die." Jesus called him out and he said, "No, I'm going to double down. I promise. I'm with you forever, Jesus." And then literally just denies even knowing him. Some of the gospel accounts even say that in that moment when the rooster crowed, they both made, like Jesus and Peter made eye contact. Can you imagine just that guilt and the shame that he felt, including, like, this wasn't just something that happened by himself, right? There was a whole crowd of people around hearing him going, no, I don't know that guy. His shame was just on display for everyone to see. I think, to be honest, like, the only way that we could experience how Peter really feels is real quick, turn to your neighbor and tell them the worst thing you've ever done in your entire life, right? Don't do that. Don't do that. I heard someone start mumbling. Don't do that, please. No, please don't. Yeah, that is like the feeling that he would have, right? If you would like have to come up here and like share whatever the worst thing is and like walk off and we all clapped for you or whatever we did, booed you, right? Like, that is how Peter felt in this moment. But thankfully, that's not the end of Peter's story. But before we continue in Peter's story, I want to take a quick little side tour, little sidecar visit to Judas and the way his story is about to play out. So if you don't remember Judas, he was one of Jesus' 12 disciples, and he kind of ratted out Jesus, got paid, and then basically made it so that he got arrested. All these things happened. And so check this out in Matthew 27, how they talk about Judas after this. When Judas, who betrayed Jesus, saw that Jesus was condemned to die, he felt deep regret. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders and said, "I did wrong because I betrayed an innocent man." But they said, "What is that to us? That's your problem." Judas threw the silver pieces into the temple and left. Then he went and he hanged himself. Can you imagine just in that moment for Judas? Judas knew that he had let Jesus down. the amount of shame that he was feeling in that moment. That's why this topic of being mad at ourselves, being mad at the past things that we've done, self-forgiveness is so important. Because for some of us, it can lead to death. And I'm talking metaphorically, but also literally. And if you're here and if like whatever that shame is that you have in your life, if you were to the point where you've thought about taking your own life, I hope you know that you are loved, that you are valuable, that you matter, that we have a God that loves you, that there are people who care about you. And if that is something that you're struggling with, please talk to somebody. Let them know. Don't let that just stay with you. You are too valuable for that to happen to. But I think for a lot of us, the thing that we learn in this is that Judas's shame and guilt, it took him over, right? He couldn't see past what he did to the point where it literally led him to death. There is something about shame that can be so destructive for us. That's why for some of us, maybe that thing that you're holding on to, that thing that you've done, that's the reason that you kind of over-medicate yourself. Because you're trying to numb yourself to that thing so you don't have to think about it in the same way, that mistake that you made in your past. Or maybe for some of us, that's the reason why you just make bad decision after bad decision, because there's something about you that feels like you don't deserve to have good things. That because of that thing that you did, that thing that you're holding on to, that you don't deserve better than that. That you're going to continue to pick destructive decision after destructive decision because that's all you deserve. Or for some of us, that shame is so destructive is literally the reason that you torpedoed that relationship. Because that person was the one that was speaking truth in your life that you really needed to hear, but you couldn't hear it at the time. So you're just like, I just don't know what I need to do besides get out of here. I need to end this relationship. There is something about shame that can just make us go down these paths, choosing all these toxic, destructive things for ourselves. They've done all kinds of study on shame, and specifically there was one came out in 2002, and this is what they said about shame that I thought was really interesting. It says, shame is an intensely unpleasant emotion, one that involved negative emotion directed at the whole self. The reason that shame is so dangerous is it isn't just about what you did, it becomes who we are. Right? Some of us have been living with this bad choice that we made, this sin that's in our lives, and it hasn't just been like, oh yeah, that's something I did. No, it's become, that's who I am. When you think about yourself, you're like, no, I can't separate myself from that thing that I did. The shame is so strong. And if that's you, if that's where you're at today, man, I hope you hear me when I say this, that your identity is not in what you did do, in what you didn't do, what you should have done. It's not in this, that thing that you're holding on to. No, you have a Savior who loves you, who literally gave up his life for you so that you could experience freedom, so you could let those things go. Well, let's jump back into the story of Peter and see where it takes him. To kind of catch you back up to this next passage, this is going to be a little bit after. It's after Jesus dies. He rises again. And then he visits and sees the disciples multiple times. And on one of the times that he sees them, there's some of them, and they're in a boat because they used to be fishermen. So they just kind of went back to like their old jobs, right? And then one night, they're up all night trying to fish, and they're not catching anything. And then all of a sudden, there's just this man that walks up on the beach and says, hey, try the other side. Which, can you just imagine, like someone walking up in your place of business saying the most like ignorant thing you can imagine? Like that's what it feels like, right? It's like someone who doesn't know anything about your job and going, yeah, have you ever tried this? And you're like, of course I've tried this. Like that's probably how they felt, right? Like that, they're kind of annoyed. They're like, all right, let's just get this stupid onlooker out of the way. And they go try the other side, and they pull up 500 some fish. And they instantly know, oh, this isn't just some random guy. This has to be Jesus. And then there's this moment, I don't know, it's supposed to be the most beautiful thing. I can't think of it and not make it a slightly comical. Because Peter, when he realizes it's Jesus, is so excited, he jumps out of the boat and swims to the shore. And then the rest of the disciples, they're just on their boat and they like pull up to the shore. I'm always like, he surely can't be that fast of a swimmer, right? Like surely he only beat the boat there by like 10 seconds. And they're all like, man, that was kind of dumb. Now you're soaking wet and like we're all dry. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But in my mind, that's what I think about every time. But so then they have this meal with Jesus. They take those fish. They cook them. They have this breakfast. And then this is what happens next. It says, when they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And Simon replied, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my lambs. Which I always thought, I remember as a kid, whenever I heard the story, I was always like, that's weird. Like, Jesus giving him chores right now? Like, go take care, like, go mow the lawn for me? No. That's not what he's telling him to do. When Jesus talked about sheep, most of the time it was him talking about, like, these are his people. So he's saying, like, take care of my people. He continues. Jesus asks a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Simon replied, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said to him, take care of my sheep. And then he asks a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was sad that Jesus had asked him a third time, do you love me? And he replied, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. In this moment, there is so much going on here because at first it could look like maybe this was like Jesus's way of punishing him, right? Like, hey, you denied me 3 times, so now you got to like make it up to me 3 times. And like now you have to do chores, you have to do all these different things. But I don't think that's what's going on here. I think what Jesus is really doing is giving Peter a retry. He says, hey, you messed up. Let's pick you back up and let's go. And there's so many small things that I think are going on in here. Isn't it weird? There's something about smell that can make us really nostalgic for certain things or kind of bring you back to certain places. Like for me, I remember in middle school, Curve cologne. Every kid wore it. I don't know if that's still happening. I don't think it is. But if you were in high school and middle school at the same time as I am, literally everyone. To the point where I literally met a guy the other day, in his 40s, and he's still rocking Curve. And I said, bro, we got to change it because I feel like I'm hanging out with a middle schooler right now. Sorry if you wear Curve. More power to you. You rock that Curve. But like, it literally brings me back to middle school literally every single time. Because I wore it, everyone wore it, right? And if you notice in these passages, like when Peter, remember when he denied Jesus, he was standing there by that fire, right? Getting warmed up, probably smelling the smoke, the bonfire. It's got such a distinct smell, right? And then in this moment, he's right here by this fire. They just got done eating breakfast, smelling that same scent, that reminder of like bringing him back to that moment when he messed up. And then, again, this public declaration. Peter had called out and said, I don't know Jesus, in front of all these people, the guards, all these other people that were surrounding him. And now Jesus gives him this opportunity. This isn't just Jesus and Peter standing at this fire, right? There's the other disciples there. He's giving him this chance to have this public declaration of him saying, God, I love you. Jesus' grace gave Peter a second chance. Jesus' grace gave Peter a new identity. It gave him a new future. And I think for so many of us, that those things that we're holding on to, the ways that we have let ourselves down, we have this choice to make, right? Are we going to choose and go with the way of Judas, or are we going to choose the way of Peter? Because of their sin, both of them were ashamed of what they did, right? But Judas stayed in his shame, and it ended up leading him to death. And Peter left his shame, and he experienced forgiveness, and it led to life and freedom so much better than he had ever even experienced before. Because so often we get trapped in the things that we can't change about our past, and you can't change your past, but Jesus can change your future. And that's exactly what Jesus does for Peter in this moment. Because a little bit later in the story, we see that Jesus ends up going and ascending into heaven. And then basically he kind of leaves his disciples that are left to stand there and go like, hey, start the church. And like, they don't know what they're doing. So they do this whole thing where they're praying and like these weird tongues of fire come down. And it's basically kind of like starts the first opening day of the church as we know it today. And in that moment, they have all these people there, and Peter is the one that stands up and does this huge message, declaring who Jesus is in front of thousands and thousands of people. And this is what happens. in Acts chapter 2, verse 41. It's kind of a book of the Bible that kind of goes over the history of the early church. It says, those who accepted Peter's message were baptized. God brought about 3,000 people into the community on that day. On that day alone, 3,000 people were brought in because of what Peter was sharing, because of how God was moving through Peter. Like, that's to say, like, we're all here in part today because of Peter. Because Peter didn't stay in his guilt and his shame. Instead, he went on and moved to something even better. Peter went from denying Jesus, declaring to everyone else that Jesus was someone that he was with, that he was his Lord, that he loved. God used Peter's biggest mistake and turned it into one of his biggest miracles. Like, Jesus didn't just use Peter because he was perfect. Jesus used Peter because he was able to accept grace and it freed him up to really live. Jesus didn't use Peter because he was always faithful. Instead, he used Peter because Peter had experienced forgiveness and he knew what it really felt like to love Jesus, to love God. There's a singer-songwriter you may have heard of before. His name's Leonard Cohen, and he's a Canadian, so he gets -1 point. But sorry if you're Canadian. I love Canada. It's our fun little hat that America gets to wear. But there's this quote that he says that I think is so powerful in a moment like this, and this is what it says. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I think for us, the truth that's in this is that so often I think we get into these places where we just kind of want to put up like this public front, right? Like, oh yeah, we got it all together. I got my life together. I'm kind of taking care of, my family, my things, all the things I need to do. And even if you like are one of those people who are like, oh, my life's a mess, and like you love to yell, because I know some people love doing that. Let's be honest, like even if you want to admit that your life's a mess, you don't want to really admit how messy it really is, right? Like we also have kind of like that front that we're putting up. And I think what's beautiful about that is that all of us have this armor, it's like we have on in front of ourselves, and that when it cracks, when there's different things that pierce it or have issues there, right? All of a sudden, that's when we can really experience God's grace. That's when we can really experience God's love and forgiveness. Oftentimes, our biggest failures can lead to our clearest experiences of God's grace in ways that you never would have got to any other way. So for us, what do we do with this? How do we move about this? How do we move forward with like this story of Peter and Judas? Well, I think the first one is simply this. Like if you have something that you've been holding on to, whether maybe it was something that happened this week, maybe it's something that happened years ago. If you have that thing that you're holding against yourself, that you let yourself down, you let somebody else down, you didn't accomplish what you thought, it's time to take responsibility for that. Like that's the first step in forgiving yourself, is just knowing that you have to just accept that this is on you. You did or didn't do this. And that means not putting the blame on somebody else, like, yeah, but they did or they should have, and not justifying it, right? And just going, you know what? This is on me. I did this. And I know even as I say that, we don't like doing that. We always want to have a reason to get out of it, but that's the first step. And then when that happens, there's 3 kind of emotions that kind of block us from really kind of getting to a place of self-forgiveness, of kind of moving past those ways that we've messed up. The first one that we talked about earlier is shame. It's this idea that this thing isn't just something I did, right? This is something that I have become who I am. This is part of my identity as a person. And the problem with shame, and they've done all kinds of studies on this, is that because it's such an intense emotion that we don't like, most of the time we just kind of hide it. Right? We kind of bottle it down and we feel shame about these things, this way that you messed up, the way that I've messed up, and then we just bottle it down and push it down so it's still there. We just try to pretend like it's not really there. And if that's you, if that is something you're struggling with, I hope you know that you are not your actions. You are not what you do. That your identity above anything else, no matter what anybody else tells you, is that you are loved by God. That is your identity. You get to stand in every single day, no matter what you've done in the past. You are loved right as you are. Even if it's maybe something that, you know what, I'm still struggling with this. This is still something I'm working on. That doesn't matter. You are still loved. And after you get past that part, when you start to really believe that for yourself, the next thing that sometimes we get tripped up on is guilt. And guilt is because sometimes we then are like, all right, this isn't who I am, but I still really messed up in this moment, right? This action that I did or didn't do, this is where I messed up. And if that's the case, the best way to move on from that thing is just ask for forgiveness. For you, maybe like the next step is like you just need to go to God with it. Like you've had this thing that's been boiling down deep inside you for years, and you've almost been too embarrassed to really bring it up to God or to vocalize it in prayer because you're so embarrassed or you're trying to hide it still as if God doesn't already know. Like maybe that's what it is. Or if it's against somebody else, maybe your next step is asking them for forgiveness and going, please, I know I messed up. I just need forgiveness from you in this thing. And for those of you who maybe have someone that like either won't forgive you or maybe because of whatever scenario has happened since, like you can't talk to that person, the third thing that'll kind of hop in a lot of times is regret, right? Like that what if. Like, what if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? And the problem is that we can live in that what if for the rest of our lives. You can run through doing those imaginary scenarios of, oh, if I would have done this differently, and if I would have done that differently, it would have all been different. But the first thing is, most likely, I know this isn't true for everyone, but for most of us, I think we can agree that you probably did the best that you could do in that moment, right? With whoever you were in that moment, hopefully you've grown as a person from that, but you did the best with the information that you had in that moment with what you could do. And if that's not you, and if that's, maybe you're like, no, I knew better and I still did it. Like the best way to move forward is just know that you can't change the past. Now you can just do better moving forward and making sure that never happens again. I had, when I was in high school, I sometimes let how cool I thought I was get to my head, and I would try to sometimes like use my coolness to like put down other people. And there's definitely a few people that I remember specifically, like it felt like it was more than even bullying. It was like kind of getting like everyone else to jump in and kind of like basically make fun of these people. And for me, one of the things like I can't change, like what I did when I was in high school, I can't change that past thing. But what I know I want to do is I want to move forward and go like, I don't ever want to be someone that makes someone else feel like that again. I don't ever want to be someone who makes someone feel less than. All of a sudden that crack in my armor is now helping me to like, you know what? I want to be one of the most encouraging people that I can to like other people around me. I want to make sure if someone else is trying to like put down someone else, like I'm the first one to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do that. That thing that I can't change, I can now move forward into and become a better version of myself. And I think the last question that all of us can ask ourselves when any of these things that we're holding on to is this: how can God use this? I think a lot of times there's two different ways. Part of it is just grace, right? There's sometimes that a lot of us, like we kind of can get a big head about ourselves, right? Like we kind of like, all right, I got this. I can figure this out. I'm pretty self-sufficient. And there are times that we just kind of need to be taken down a peg or two to be reminded like, oh no, like I might be, a capable person in a lot of ways, but I still need God. Like his goodness and how amazing he is, I need that every day. And when we mess up and we give that to God, God can use that to show us how good he really is. And we can experience his love, his freedom better than ever before. Peter absolutely loved Jesus more than he ever did before he made that mistake, right? He only grew, and we can do that same thing. And the second thing is just growth, right? God can use this to grow us, to bring the up there down here, to find ways to help other people who are experiencing maybe those same things. I feel like so many people I know that are serve and really passionate about things, it's almost always because of some hurt that happened in their past. Maybe it happened to them, but oftentimes it's also maybe a regret that they did, and now they want to move forward and make the world a better place in that specific area. Like God can use our pain and our brokenness and our ways that we have messed up for bigger and better things than we can ever imagine, just like Peter. And for some of you, I'll kind of end our time here today with this, but some of you have been holding on to this thing. and you've punished yourself and you've gone over it for years, and God has already forgiven you. God is already saying, hey, let it go. And I'm not going to sing the song because that would be weird right now, and I don't have a good voice, I'm sorry. But he's saying, let it go. Free up your hands. God is trying to call you into something new, into life, and you're still stuck holding on to the past. Open up your hands so God can use those hands and partner with you to heal not only you, but to heal this world. Because guys, it's so hard to be angry when you unclench your fists and open them up to the freedom and the life that Jesus is calling us into.